Anybody that wants to testify, please sign in at the back, and please turn off your cell phones while you're in here. We have two very large bills this morning to hear. We'll start with 377, Senate Bill 377, and we have a maximum of an hour and a half to spend on this bill totally, including committee questions. So if there's too many people wanting to speak and some of them talk too long, I'll just have to end up by asking you to give your name, and that'll be all. So with that, we'll start with the sponsors. Senator Wanzenreed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Dave Wanzenreed. I have the privilege of representing Senate District 49 in Missoula. Members, I bring to you this morning Senate Bill 377. If you read the title, it deals with medical marijuana, and you're going to say, oh, here we go again. Well, like last time, several weeks ago, we had a hearing on this bill, and you had asked me, Mr. Chairman, and others, to ensure that we didn't have a circus that would duplicate what happened in 2011, and I can assure you today we'll have a very good conversation about this. I need to tell you that I got an email the other day that said that this is the most dangerous marijuana bill ever introduced. And since then, I've gotten hundreds of emails about my being a felon, a user, a beard, a guy from Missoula, all those things that we use as a stereotype to associate marijuana users. And I need to tell you that, yes, I'm a person that uses alternative medicine, but I never did use medical marijuana, and I'd like to keep the discussion at the level of the policy question that's at hand. And the policy question we need to ask ourselves is, if we're going to have a system of marijuana for those people that are legally prescribed a prescription to use medical cannabis, because this bill proposes to change the name to cannabis, the scientific term, and replace the slang term that's in the statute, are we going to have a reasonable system and a functional system that actually regulates the growth and the prescription of this and the use of this? Or are we going to have a system of the type that we have now that essentially drives this underground into the black market, which is what has happened? And that's a large reason for the fact that we don't have as many people here that actually use medical marijuana, in some cases illegally. Some people actually use medical marijuana illegally because they cannot get a prescription. And those are the people we talked about several weeks ago, veterans principally, post-traumatic stress disorder, and others that can seek relief and not be forced to use harsh prescription medication, psychotropic drugs that have harsh side effects. Members of the committee, the bill is in no way intended to be an affront to those of you that served on this very committee 2 years ago. In fact, most of the expertise in the legislature resides on this committee, both in the House and the Senate, because most of the work that was done on Senate Bill 423 was done by many of you that serve on this committee this session. For that reason, I ask that this bill be transferred here, re-referred from the Senate Business and Labor Committee to this committee so that we can have a good hearing on the basis of that expertise that resides here. Members of the committee, one of the things that is important to note is who it is that has legally prescribed medical marijuana cards. They're not all from Missoula. They're from your communities. They're from Rygate. They're from Florence. They're from Hingham. They're from other small communities around this state. And many, many people have legal prescriptions to use medical cannabis. They use it for a variety of purposes, and the bill proposes to add post-traumatic stress disorders to those conditions that can legally be prescribed. Now, many of you last time said to me, well, I think the system needs to be fixed before we expand it at all. We shouldn't add any more conditions. If you want to do that, amend the bill and take that section out. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. For those of you that voted against post-traumatic stress disorder last time, don't let that be the reason this time that you vote against this bill. Because some of you said to me privately, I think we need to fix the system. I just can't vote for another condition until we do. Well, here's the opportunity for you as a member of this committee to put your hands on this bill and fix it. And if you feel that it's not appropriate to expand it in any way to include post-traumatic stress disorder, take that section out. Members of the committee, I want to just walk you through what the bill does very briefly. As I said in my earlier part, it proposes to change the word marijuana from the slang expression to its scientific term, medical cannabis. I believe it provides a realistic and workable system of regulation that proposes a seed-to-sale tracking system. It establishes a fee system to pay for this. And if you look at the fiscal note, it's rather lengthy. It does a good job of explaining to you other parts of what the bill proposes to do and why there's a cost associated with that. And you all know, all of us argue all the time, that regulation costs something. So if you truly want to have a system that regulates this substance, it's going to cost money. The system we have now is on the cheap, and because of that, too many users, too many people that have legitimate needs are forced to go on the black market, and there's really no way to enforce the system we have right now. And more importantly, the other part of the policy question needs to be asked is, because of those efficiencies in the statute, should we allow the courts to continue to impose injunctions and allow other court proceedings to proceed at the cost of the taxpayers, or should the legislature drive the policy making? And I would argue to those of you on this committee that you've heard this argument many times, the legislature alone should set the policies. And I think we've provided a framework last time that simply needs to be modified to reflect the realities of what we have. And I'm going to ask the Secretary to pass around, as you might suspect, yes, there are constitutional issues with this bill. I have a legal review notice that I was given as a sponsor of this bill. Because we have medical marijuana, medical cannabis in Montana, we are technically in violation of the National Controlled Substances Act. And because of that, there's a legal review notice that was given to me that I guess is going to have copies made, that as a sponsor of this bill, I acknowledge that this bill does not comply with that restriction. The only reason my bill doesn't is because the voters in this state on 2 occasions now have affirmed a policy that says we will have medical cannabis. That law itself flies in the face of the Controlled Substances Act, and any amendments to that act do as well, and that's what you'll read when you get this document. The most significant thing that this bill does, members of the committee, is to really put an end to the litigation that's underway. There are a lot of court proceedings around, a lot of injunctions that you're going to hear about from other proponents of the bill, and we need to, as a legislature, to discuss this. If there's anything dangerous about this bill, I think you'll agree the danger would be not to talk about these things, to have the family secret and simply ignore what we need to fix. We need to have a discussion about this issue along with any other issues in a public forum of this type to decide if the legislature is going to step up and take a look at the deficiencies in that statute. Members of the committee, there are some deficiencies in my own bill, and I want to bring your attention to some of the amendments that are going to be offered that I've had the staff prepare and ask them to distribute it whenever it's appropriate, Mr. Chairman. After the bill was printed and during the time it was being drafted, there were a number of things that were recommended to me, and the deficiencies in this bill are mine alone. Any oversights on the part of those of us that put the bill together are mine alone. So if you don't like the bill because of something that's being corrected, it's my responsibility to do that. I missed some things, and I'm asking you to take a look at some amendments that fix those. Those that work in corrections and pre-release had some concerns about some language that you'll hear about. The Board of Medical Examiners had some concerns regarding prescriptive authority principally, and then disciplinary actions that could be taken for those that violate this particular statute. And yes, the Senate leadership and some of you on this committee talked to me about concerns you have, including a provision in the bill that would have allowed those with medical cannabis cards to use that substance in public. And the amendments you're getting now would propose to eliminate that provision and retain the existing language. I want to go back to the part about this being a dangerous bill. There's nothing inherently dangerous about discussing any issue in a public forum, and I'd like to keep the discussion on the merits of the bill. If you don't like the bill, I understand that. If you don't like the fact that we have people that have legal access to medical cannabis currently, I understand that, but the voters have already told us twice, that we're going to have medical marijuana in Montana. And for that reason, I'd like to have a discussion about the framework within which people are prescribed and can use medical cannabis. Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. How many people are here to testify in favor of this bill? And are there people here to testify in opposition to it? Okay, not too many of either, so we should do fine with time. Let's have the first proponent, please.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Katie Heisteman. The first name is spelled K-A-T-Y. The last name is H-E-I-T-S-T-U-M-A-N. And I'm here representing the ACLU of Montana. The ACLU of Montana is in strong support of this bill for several reasons. One, as Senator Watson-Reed spoke to you about, it's a great tracking system. It's a great way to bring this system out into the open. It's a great way to make sure that patients, providers, caregivers, and law enforcement make sure that they're following the same rules. This is a great fix for a criminal justice system. Medical marijuana prosecutions are a huge problem on our criminal justice system now, and this system makes it so that patients have a way to legally provide the medical cannabis that they use to treat their systems in a way that's legal and out in the open. Montanans believe in medical cannabis. Once again, this is the second time that Montanans have affirmed this decision. They believe in regulation and control as well. And this bill does a great step forward in providing the regulation and control that assuages many of the fears that Montanans have about medical cannabis. The ACLU of Montana always stands in strong support of the right to make autonomous private medical decisions with their medical provider. And once again, medical cannabis, and this bill is just a way to protect that. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for giving a good example. I forgot to ask people that if your name is more complicated than Smith or Jones, please spell it for the record as you come up to testify. Next proponent, please.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Sean Palmer. That's S-H-A-W-N-P-A-L-M-E-R. And I have some handouts here. I also am hugely in favor of this new bill that will basically fix what we started back in 2004. Now, the people voted it in for good reason. There's a lot of people out there that have medical issues, obviously, that as they get older, the system's capacity to take on some of these pharmaceuticals is really, really difficult. And the older these people get, the less their systems can tolerate these harsh chemicals. Therefore, natural holistic medicine is definitely making a very strong comeback as education is available and people are becoming more and more aware of the benefits of holistic medicine. There's definitely a path towards that. Now, I have 3 different handouts for the committee here. The first one that I have is a printout of Senate Bill number 216, which was introduced by Jay Peterson. And this is an act designating the Code of the West as the official code of the state of Montana and providing an immediate effective date. Now, there's 10 different things in here that are fairly important. That if we are going to be moralistic and ethical, these are things that definitely we should remind ourselves of as we're going about our daily business. Number 1, live each day with courage. Number 2, take pride in your work. Number 3, a very important one, always finish what you start. Now, this is something that was started in 2004 that's still very much on the rocks. Do what has to be done. Sometimes it's not always easy, but...
Mr. Chairman, excuse me, I'm sorry. Are we on Senate Bill 377 because the handout refers to Senate Bill 216?
Correct. I'm reminding everybody about what was passed last legislative session, and this code of ethics is very important, and it's something that we should remember as we're looking at Senate Bill 377. So I'm just reiterating what some of these points are that everybody already voted for and agreed that these are things that we should be taking into account on a daily basis. I'll hurry through it. Be tough but fair. When you make a promise, keep it. I think that's one that we should remember. Ride for the brand. Take less and say more. Remember that some things are not for sale, and know where to draw the line. The second handout that I have is from the party platform of the Republicans. And if you go to the third page, medical use of marijuana, it specifically states, we recognize that a significant problem exists with Montana's current laws regarding the medical use of marijuana, and we support action by the next legislature to create a workable and realistic regulatory structure. Well, here we are, Senate Bill 377. That's exactly what we have here, and we have the party platform promising that they are going to try and make an attempt to fix this. So once again, when you make a promise, keep it. That's what I'm here to kind of remind everybody of. And then the third thing I want to bring out, according to our handouts, Color 8 News actually had a special news gathering that they had because some of our opponents would have you believe that this isn't backed by popular demand. Well, obviously, they must be kidding, because they themselves held a press conference to say just how confusing the ballot language was for I-124. And personally, I've talked to a lot of people who voted the complete opposite of what they thought they were voting for on I-124. So it's grossly inaccurate. So anyway, those are the things that I have to say. I'll keep it short and sweet, and please just remember that we do have a commitment here, not only to ourselves, but to the community at large, and most specifically the patients who are legally approved to use this medicine. Thank you.
Thank you. Next proponent, please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Nathan Pierce. I'm here representing the Montana Coalition for Rights. 2004, Montana was given medical cannabis or medical marijuana. And in last legislative session, we had a pretty difficult decision to make on how to regulate medical cannabis, and Senate Bill 423 was created. Senate Bill 377 seeks to amend the law that was created by Senate Bill 423. As many of you know who work in this building every single day, laws evolve. They have to have a better understanding, and sometimes that takes years, and even with this law, close to decades. I think we've finally reached a point where we really understand and have some more knowledge about medical cannabis. And we understand at this point that although Senate Bill 423 was a great stride to putting up some sideboards towards the medical cannabis industry, there was some things that still need to be done, and Senate Bill 377 does those things. I urge a due pass from this committee, and as Senator Wanzenreed said, I hope that if there are parts or provisions of the bill that are unacceptable, we can work together in a bipartisan manner, as was done in order to get the amendments introduced, and tailor the bill that will provide patients access, that will allow police officers to do their job, that will allow the state to inspect, and that will prevent diversion of medical cannabis into our communities and schools. I have a high school-age daughter, and she comes home to me and explains to me how marijuana is more influential in her school today than it was before the passage of Senate Bill 423. There are more kids, there are more drug dealers hanging around our schools that have no oversight from anybody. Let's take the marijuana and the money out of the hands of those cartels, and let's put it back into the hands of our community with some oversight. This bill also offers some provisions to help out with some budgetary concerns. I think those are very important. Again, I urge a due pass, and I thank each and every one of you for your time on considering this bill.
Thank you. Next proponent. Anyone else to speak in favor? Better get up to the mic if you're wanting to speak. Okay, we'll go to opponents. First opponent.
Good morning. Chairman Murphy, members of the committee. I'm Kenton Hickether. My first name is spelled Kenton. Last name is Hickether. I'm the current colonel for the Montana Highway Patrol. Today I'm here to represent the Montana Department of Justice and the Montana Narcotics Officer Association. The Montana Narcotics Officer Association includes agents, detectives, and uniform officers throughout the state, including drug task forces. They come from the city police departments, all of our 56 sheriff's offices, and the Montana Highway Patrol. Today, we encourage you to strongly oppose this bill. We don't want to see us go backward into similar situations that we have dealt with previously. It presents us a huge amount of problems. All law enforcement and the Montana Department of Justice strongly oppose this bill. Thank you.
Next opponent, please.
Chairman Murphy and members of the Judiciary Committee, my name is Susan Smith, S-M-I-T-H, and I live in Billings, Montana. I truly am grateful to be able to have this opportunity to stand before you today and testify against this bill. And I am standing before you in behalf of Safe Community, Safe Kids, and also thousands of people across the state of Montana. Safe Community and Safe Kids was formed by a group of concerned mothers with a mission to inform and engage citizens to take action against legislation against marijuana that would preserve the safety, prosperity, protection of our communities, our families, and especially the future of our children. When I was a child, I learned many valuable principles from my parents. They taught me that wrong plus wrong does not equal right. I think the caption of the Billings Gazette article that I read just recently about this bill really echoes my sentiments of dismay, as well as thousands of people across the state of Montana, in response to Senate Bill 377, where it said, another medical pot bill emerges. The question is, does SB 423 need to be changed? I believe in the last vote on November 6th, the people of Montana voted no, and they are satisfied with SB 423. And someone pointed out something about the language on that, and we specifically had an individual from the marijuana folk that spoke to us and said that he even realized that that language was confusing and they were part of that process there. And so I believe that the people truly think and believe I know they believe that SB 423 is just fine and they don't want anything changed. Then this session, 6 more bills have been introduced and 6 bills have been killed. I would say that's a no. We don't need more regulations, revisions, or new sections. So what do we do now with SB 377? I believe that probably all of you are familiar with the universal law of inertia. That is, if we are not moving forward, we are moving backward. You can't stand still. If SB 377 was enacted, we would definitely be moving backwards as it implements all the old bills presented last session and adds new stuff. Something that is far more dangerous and even more and worse than what the people got upset about in the beginning. So what are you saying in SB 377? That you want to regulate, this is what you're saying as far as I can see in reading the bill, that you want to regulate marijuana outside the normal channels of regulation. That would create a huge growth in government. It would be like putting the foxes in charge of the hen houses, like a board to regulate gambling that only gamblers are on it, or a board to regulate drunk driving which only had drunk drivers on it, and that would be ridiculous, and I think you would all agree. The people from Yellowstone County made it clear, as so did other counties across the state of Montana, they don't want a bunch of pot shops set up in direct opposition to our community standards, which were then set up next to schools and churches and really anywhere. They don't want an industry or grow operations or legalization or taxes from illegal drugs. I want to remind you, these are illegal drugs. That status hasn't changed. They don't want more crime, illegal activity, or their children's futures being jeopardized. The original initiative in 2004 never talked about any of these ideas that are being presented in SB 377, and I guess I get really irritated when I keep hearing in 2004 the people voted for an industry. They did not. And they did not vote for pot shops or grow operations or anything else. They didn't even vote on how many plants you could have or where you could get it from. So I don't know why we keep talking about it. And there is a high rate of satisfaction among people in regard to SB 423 in its entirety. Now, there's another problem that they've talked about here, too, and that is that the reason why they're probably having more problems at the schools now is the fact that an injunction was placed by the marijuana people through Judge Reynolds, and so the law can't do what they need to do. And they can still get their marijuana and pretty much grow what they want. Really, so what we are asking in this bill is to do whatever we want, and we have to accept it, no matter the cost to the people and the state, which is in direct conflict with what the people of Montana were so outraged about before. In reference to page 48, section 40, it looks like, in regard to the special revenue, it looks like there is something in it for everybody, but really it is just another excuse to grow government. Anytime we have collected taxes, like on alcohol, tobacco, and in gambling, the social ills that have been created have never been taken care of, and it doesn't take care of the financial problems either. What it really does is take away the people's opportunity to be self-reliant. This almost looks like model legislation from NORML, who wants to totally legalize and legitimize marijuana. There was a thought put out there in regard to, the marijuana people can't get their marijuana, they have to go to the black market. Well, that's just simply not true in all cases. And the injunction that has been placed by Judge Reynolds still allows them to grow marijuana and get marijuana. And there are a lot of hydroponic places in Billings, or I know at least one, and I'm sure there are in other places across the state that can help you to do that if you need to do it. Marijuana has been growing for thousands of years. It's not hard to grow. You can go onto the internet and you can find out exactly how to do it, and it's pretty easy. You can make just about anything with it. So that really isn't an argument. And I would just like to end by just saying that I am adamantly opposed, as are thousands of people across the state of Montana, and would like you to and encourage you to act in unity in regard to opposing this bill in all of its entirety. And just a few words of wisdom: just let it be. Thank you.
Next, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Pat Keim, and that's spelled K-E-I-M. I'm here today representing Alternatives, Inc. out of Billings. Alternatives, Inc. is the operator of a pre-release system that has contracts for handling inmates from not only the state of Montana and the local courts in Billings, but also the federal government. Alternatives, Inc. worked extensively with the sponsor last session of Senate Bill 423, and we were kind of the front organization working on behalf of the other pre-release centers in the state on the issue. And the specific issue that we had at that time with 423 was this: our contracts with the federal government, the U.S. Department of Justice, Bureau of Prisons, specifically forbids the allowance of any kind of controlled substance that would include marijuana or cannabis, as some would call it, in our facilities. Think about this. We're operating essentially a low intensity or low security jail penitentiary system with reform programs aimed at restoring inmates back into the community. And that's a problem when we would have something like this in there. So we worked to get Senate Bill 423 to get some specific coverages in, which we were successful in doing to protect our concern and our interests there. This particular bill, Senate Bill 377, has a lot of strikeouts, and among the things struck out were those protections that we worked to get into the bill the last session. Specifically, our opposition to this bill is aimed at those provisions being struck out, and we would ask that they be reinserted back into this legislation. And I would cite you specific points in the bill, Senate Bill 377, that were struck out that need to be put back in. They are on page 13, line 1. There's a definition of what is a correctional facility, and that entire definition was struck out and needs to be put back in. Page 23, line 24, was a provision stating specifically that an inmate of one of these correctional facilities could not be a medical marijuana card holder, and that was struck out and needs to be re-established in this bill. Page 25, line 13, specifically stated that the Department of Health and Human Services could not issue a card to a person under the Department of Corrections or in a correctional facility. That too was struck out and needs to be reinserted. And then on page 35, line 16, is a provision that any person under a program under the Department of Corrections, which would include the pre-release programs, that was struck out and needs to be reinserted. There's an amendment being drafted that would accomplish these reinsertions, and that's what we ask that you would do. And these things need to be put back in order to protect us. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Jeff Laszloffy, L-A-S-Z-L-O-F-F-Y, with the Montana Family Foundation. I don't know how to make my last name any easier. Mr. Chairman, members, I think what we have here is a balance that's finally been struck on this issue. The thing that you need to remember is, in your seats as legislators, policy drives practice. And we saw that with the vote in 2004, where the policy was wide open, anything goes, and the practice was wide open, anything goes. And I would argue that it was an unmitigated disaster. Everybody in the state could see that as it evolved. Finally, we got to the point last session where we sat down and said we need to put some serious sideboards on this. The people have had several chances now to weigh in on this, and I would argue that the 2004 vote on the original ballot referendum was a vote taken in ignorance. And what we're seeing now is a vote taken through an informed position, because we've had a chance as a culture to talk through these arguments for the past almost decade now. Backed by popular demand, one of the proponents said, I don't think it's backed by popular demand. I think it's backed by the people that have a vested interest in this, and everybody's free to bring this before you and try to get the legislation crafted that they want to see. But especially on controversial issues like this, it's important to remember that the reason that you exist and the reason that we sit here in chambers like this is to try to craft policy that works for everyone. And usually that means that not everyone gets everything that they want. I guess I personally would just rather see this issue go away and there not be legalized medical marijuana in any form. The other side would probably rather go to the other extreme. And so we need to meet someplace in the middle. And that, I think, is what we did with Senate Bill 423 in the last session. There was also the argument made that the ballot referendum language was confusing. I would argue that they're probably right, but I would argue that it was confusing in favor of the proponents of medical marijuana. And the fact that it still went down, even with the confusion in the language, I would submit shows even more clearly that the people of the state are becoming settled on this issue. We've allowed medical marijuana to exist to a degree, not to the degree that it was before, but to a degree that works for everyone, and probably to a degree that's more fitting with the understanding of the original 2004 ballot referendum. And so for that reason, we would ask that you not change the language as it currently exists, and that you please vote no on Senate Bill 377. Thank you.
Next, please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name's Dave Ponte, Ponte. I'm here representing just myself. And this particular issue, I'd like to address from a moral standpoint. The whole concept of medical marijuana, to me from the get-go, is a misnomer. This is really a concept of people that want to smoke dope versus people who don't think it's right. And obviously, as a nation, we've spent over $1 trillion minimum trying to combat drug-related issues in this nation. I don't have any solutions to that problem, but by considering approving this particular revision to Senate Bill 423, which was passed 2 years ago with a lot of discussion, a lot of heartfelt soul-searching, I think it brought the state to the point where the out-of-control pot industry tamped down a bit. It's been relatively quiet for the last 2 years, and I think Senate Bill 423 did that. The other couple of points that I'd just like to make is this is Senate Bill 377 is a bill designed to try to change the language here that we use in our culture, from changing marijuana to using the term cannabis. As for myself personally, I was a long-time pot smoker. So in regards to Senator Wanzenreed's comments at the beginning of his talk about people with beards are assumed to be pot smokers, that I was a pot smoker. And I realized 20-some years ago that being a pot smoker, that if I was really feeling really good on a particular day and the world was right with me and I smoked a joint, I felt that much better. But if there were days where I had aches and pains or something was bothering me and I smoked a joint, it just tended to make the problem worse. So as far as addressing the medicinal part, I'm sorry, I don't accept it. And some of the language in the bill where they've changed physician, the name physician, to healthcare provider, I'm curious why that change was considered to be needed. Healthcare providers are not physicians. Physicians take an oath which says they will do no harm. So I'm wondering what the need was to change the definition of someone who is supposedly prescribing to people, the need to change that from physician to healthcare provider. Another issue was a cannabis exchange broker. All these fancy terms, a cannabis exchange broker in the language of pot smokers is a dealer. To anybody that understands what it is, we're talking about dealers. Couriers are people who just transport the drugs from the supplier to the user. So we're trying to create a new language in Senate Bill 377, which I believe is truly deceptive. The other issue is involving many more governmental bureaucracies to regulate the supposed industry, or you would be involving Department of Agriculture, obviously law enforcement, and the tax revenue department. And the final point that I'd like to just bring up is the funds that are supposedly going to be raised for state government to spend. 25% goes to local government, 25% to Medicaid-related programs, 25% to schools, and the other 25% it's supposed to go to FWP. As a taxpayer, to consider that tax revenue is coming from a source of a illegal drug, federally regulated illegal drug, to benefit the taxpayers within the state, I find to be an abhorrence. And I'll leave it with the final comment that it doesn't matter how many ways you put pig or lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. Thank you.
How many more opponents are planning to speak? Okay, if there's many more, it's going to have to start being brief with your comments.
Members of the committee, my name is Sherry Brady. I am from Billings, Montana. I am the chair of Safe Community, Safe Kids. I represent tens of thousands of people across Montana who fought long and hard to bring the medical marijuana industry in Montana under control. After many grueling hours by the legislators 2 years ago, SB 423 was passed. In November, the majority of the citizens of Montana voted in favor of SB 423. They support it, they like it, they feel that the changes that it made were necessary changes, and they have come to an acceptance of this industry underneath SB 423. They did not accept it before as a wild, unregulated industry. There is a lot being said, and it's being tossed around about people's right to choose. Well, what about the voters' right to choose when they chose that SB 423 was the bill for Montana? And this bill, they said that they did not want it reformed or rewritten, that the bill was what was right for them. SB 377 takes Montana back to where it was before SB 423, and actually it makes it a little worse. So the voters say that they like SB 423, and we introduce SB 377, which is exactly the opposite of what the voters said that they liked. This bill would put Montana in a similar situation as the mess that Colorado finds themselves in today. In Colorado Springs, the pot shops outnumber Starbucks 4-1, and they outnumber McDonald's 3-1. But there's actually way more serious consequences than all the pot shops that you see while you walk down the street. I have a letter here from Dr. Kenneth Flynn, who works with addiction and recovery of adolescents and youth. And he says some of the other problems we are seeing in Colorado is the dramatic increase of admissions of marijuana dependency and addiction. Exposure of marijuana and marijuana products to young children are on the increase in drug driving facility associations with marijuana. And he cites the website that you can find that information, and I'll give you a copy of this. Short and long-term effects on learning and education, and surrounding states seeing an increase of marijuana trafficking out of Colorado. I don't believe the Colorado Department of Education would take the time to publish information on their website concerning adolescents' use of marijuana if they weren't seeing a problem. Colorado is seeing a significant increase in disciplinary action as a result of an increase in marijuana use over the past several years. This bill opens the gates again. It opens the floodgates, and it'll allow it all to come back. We'll end up in the same mess that we were years ago, and it'll be harder to close that gate again. It doesn't fix any of the medical marijuana problems, it creates them. Taxing medical marijuana entrenches it into the community and makes it literally impossible to get it out of there again. It grows the government. There'll have to be a whole new branch and a whole new area of government to regulate the medical marijuana industry that this bill is imposing. Passing this bill will go against the will of the majority of the Montana citizens, and I urge you to vote against this bill.
Would you spell your last name, please?
Brady.
Next, please.
Good morning, Chairman Murphy. My name is Candace Payne, Payne. I'm here speaking on behalf of Rimrock Foundation. Rimrock is Montana's largest and oldest provider of addiction treatment, serving over 4,000 patients annually in 134 beds, with a large outpatient program in a continuum of service levels. The treatment professionals at Rimrock unequivocally oppose marijuana use for the reasons set out in this handout, and I'd like to pass this out to shorten up my testimony. During the 2011 legislative session, Rimrock worked very hard to get the then existing medical marijuana law changed. Rimrock fully supported the repeal of the original Medical Marijuana Act, but that was vetoed by our governor. Rimrock then supported Senator Essman's bill, which was eventually approved by the voters and encoded as the Montana Marijuana Act. Senate Bill 377 would amend that act to create the Montana Medicinal Cannabis Act. Testimony presented on this issue on previous bills has asserted that cannabis is not the same thing as marijuana, and I was sharply reprimanded in my testimony for referring to it as pot or marijuana. The Mayo Clinic, in its August 25, 2006 article, Marijuana as Medicine, provides the following definition. Marijuana refers to the dried flowers, leaves, stems, and seeds of the cannabis sativa plant. The U.S. Department of Agriculture provides the biological classification of marijuana in this table. May I pass this out, please? When you get a chance to look at this table, you will see that cannabis is the Latin name for marijuana, or marijuana is the common name for cannabis. So it's not all that important what we call it. As Shakespeare tells us, a rose by any other name would smell the same, and I would assert that marijuana or cannabis would be the same no matter what you call it. Marijuana is a gateway drug. Scientific data from the National Center of Substance Abuse indicated that those states where medicinal marijuana had been legalized saw a corresponding increase in the use of this drug by adolescents. This finding corresponds with over 40 years of Rimrock experience at treating adolescents in trouble with substance abuse. Among marijuana's most harmful consequences is the potential role in leading to the use of other illegal drugs like cocaine and heroin. Long-term studies of high school students and their patterns of drug use show that very few young people use other illegal drugs first without trying marijuana. While not all people who use marijuana go on to use other drugs, using marijuana puts children and teens in contact with people who are users and sellers of other drugs. So there's more of a risk that marijuana users will be exposed to and urged to try more dangerous drugs. A recent study by Columbia University's Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse found a pronounced difference in future drug use between kids who used marijuana and those who did not. It revealed that teens who smoke marijuana are 85 times more likely to use cocaine than those who do not. This means the odds of using other drugs increases with the use of marijuana. The provisions of Senate Bill 377 make it easier to get marijuana in Montana. Under the provisions of Senate Bill 377, marijuana would become more easily accessible for all segments of our population, thereby increasing its availability to our adolescents and young people. Some of the particularly objectionable provisions of the bill are specifically in Section 8. This bill is supposed to provide for medicinal cannabis, but it removes the requirement for a physician to be making the determination of need and the diagnosis. This section turns that over to a healthcare provider, which is defined as not only a medical doctor, but also a chiropractor, a psychologist, a physician's assistant, a naturopath, or anyone else who has prescriptive authority. Currently, chiropractors, psychologists, and naturopaths are specifically prohibited from prescribing drugs under Montana law. Section 13 gets rid of the provision limiting the number of users that a provider can supply. It gets rid of the requirement for fingerprints and a background check by the Department of Justice. It gets rid of the requirement of a proof that a provider is a Montana resident. It also gets rid of the provision that a provider cannot have had a felony conviction or a conviction for a drug offense or is in the custody or under the supervision of the Department of Corrections. It removes the requirement that a provider cannot be delinquent in payment of taxes or child support. Section 15 takes out the oversight of this medicinal product from the Montana Board of Medical Examiners. Section 28 limits a local government's authority to inspection of marijuana-related businesses to ensure compliance with sanitary requirements established by the DPHHS. It deletes the local government's authority to inspect the business for noncompliance with public health, safety, or welfare requirements. The only thing they can look at are the sanitary requirements. Section 29 takes the teeth out of the inspection procedures by limiting them to one inspection per year and deletes the inspection authority currently in place for state or local law enforcement agencies. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration states on its website that marijuana is the most commonly abused illicit drugs in the United States. It is a dry, shredded, green-brown mix of flowers, stems, seeds, and leaves of the plant Cannabis sativa. Marijuana is a Schedule I substance under the Controlled Substances Act. So whether you call it cannabis or marijuana, it is still an illegal drug under the federal law. According to a report prepared by Legislative Services since the 2011 Montana Marijuana Act was implemented, the number of individuals registered to use marijuana for medical conditions dropped by 72% from May 2011 through July 2012. The number of patients in May 2011 was 31,522, but by the end of July 2012, there were only 8,834 registered medical marijuana patients. Please do not take away this effective tool. Senate Bill 423, the law that is currently in place, is a good law, and this would be a bad law. Thank you for your time.
Are there further opponents?
I'm a proponent. Can I speak?
You weren't here when proponents were speaking. Sorry.
Okay.
Is anyone here as an informational witness?
I can be an informational witness, but I'd like to be a opponent.
Well, I'm going to have to ask you to only give your name, and if you have written testimony, my caution about brief testimony was ignored, and so we're out of time.
All right.
We've got to have some time here for committee questions and a closing statement.
I understand.
So would you just give your name, please, and say that you're an opponent, if that's what you are?
Steve Zabawa. I am an opponent. I would like just a quick, I'll make it very quick.
Could you spell your name, please?
Z as in zebra, then A, B as in boy, A, W-A, Zabawa. I'm representing Safe Community, Safe Kids, as well as the Montana Automobile Dealers Association, as well as my car dealerships in Billings, Montana, as well as my family. Senators, I appreciate your taking this issue up again, and I met with Senator Wanzereed last week, and we had a good discussion about it. And we have a problem, and the problem is in the state of Montana.
Yes. Name, please.
Yeah, Steve Zabawa.
Yeah, but that's the end of your testimony, till you're asked questions, if you are.
Okay.
Time is up.
So I drove all the way? Yeah, okay, thank you.
Time is up.
Are there any questions?
No, time is up. I'll ask for questions when the time comes.
Thank you.
And Representative Peppers, you will be listed on the list of proponents. Thank you. We're ready for questions from the committee. Senator Gent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question for Mr. Zabawa, please. Mr. Zabawa, could you tell us, and to follow up on your informational, just giving us your name and so forth, if you oppose the bill, give us some of the reasons you oppose it very quickly.
Yeah, my opposition comes from studying this matter for the last 3 years and how it's affected my businesses, my families, and the automobile dealerships in the state of Montana, and the kids within the communities that I live in Billings. And the problem is that the state of Montana is over their head in dealing with medical marijuana, or pot in this case. The voter initiative came into play in 2004, and then they gave us the right as a state to deal an illegal drug. And we've done it unsuccessfully for 8 years now. So pot, I do know, is the ultimate assassinator of initiative. I've seen it happen in my family. I've seen it happen in my employees. I've seen it happen with my friends. And I've seen it kill people. So it's a very, very serious drug, and it can't be taken lightly. So how do we get it away from our community and get it away from students that don't graduate because of smoking pot and don't showing up for their classes and being stoned all the time? So my suggestion is that we get it out of the state, completely repeal it, go to a 50-state FDA, Attorney General legislation through our great senators, Baucus, Tester, or Stephen Daines, and go and actually get something done where the states get out of the game of dealing drugs. We don't need to be in this deal. Nobody should be dealing drugs at this level. We have done a very ineffective job at it, and I'd like to see something done where our great President Obama, along with the Attorney General Eric Holder, along with the senators of the United States and the legislators up there, the House representatives, put something together that clarifies it for all 50 states, and don't allow these voter initiatives to force us into the drug business. That's our problem. And we really need to get a solution to it. And Dave Wanzerreed, as well as myself, I'd like to go to Washington and work on this at the federal level and get the FDA, if there is something good about marijuana and it's good for our citizens, it needs to go through regular pharmacists. It needs to go through regular doctors that are trained on this and where it's been tested and proven to be safe for our citizens. Right now, we're giving out stuff to our citizens in Montana that's not proven to be safe. It hasn't been proven to be anything. Yet we're allowing ourselves to grow marijuana illegally in the state. So, Senator Gent, that's our problem, and I think that's the true solution at the end of the day. Definitely not to put more legislation on the books or undo things that we've already done.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any more questions for Mr. Zabawa. I don't have any more questions for Mr. Zabawa, but I have a question for staff, for Julianne. Can I ask that now? There's Mr. Chairman, Julianne, there's a legal review note dated February 14th, 2013 that cites, among other cases, Gonzalez versus Reich, wherein in Reich the court held that under the Supremacy Clause, the federal statute superseded Montana's Compassionate Use Act. Is Reich still good law?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Gent, as far as I know, it is.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Julianne.
Are there further questions from committee members? Further questions from committee? Senator Fielder.
For the sponsor, please.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Wanzerreed, I understand you requested these amendments that were handed out to us, and my question is, have you received concurrence or consulted with Senator Essman, who was the drafter of SB 423 that I think you're probably, this bill addresses quite a bit. Is he working on this with you?
Mr. Chairman and Senator, the answer is yes. I provided Senator Essman, the President, with a copy of the amendments that you have, as well as other members of this committee. And I want to add that the amendment that was discussed by Mr. Keim on behalf of the corrections and detention folks is one of the amendments that's here, and also will be offered by another member of your committee. So I believe that many members of this committee that have approached me about this issue have seen the amendments you've got, plus the amendments that Senator Whittick, if I might refer to him, Mr. Chairman, also has. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, would it be all right if I asked the sponsor if he could summarize what these amendments do?
Certainly.
Mr. Chairman, and very briefly, and I'll be happy to provide you with a more elaborate description. The first thing that it does, and one of the amendments that's important here is the one that was mentioned by Ms. Payne regarding prescription authority. The Board of Medical Examiners approached me about that issue, and I agreed that it needed to be changed to retain the existing statute. So that's one of the things that is, I believe, corrected, and if it needs to be strengthened to clarify that, obviously we'll be happy to do that as well. There's reciprocity provisions in the bill that would be removed if you approve the amendments. As I said, that it would retain the existing language or reinstate the language in the bill governing pre-release centers and corrections officers, and I had spoken with Mr. Keim and Senator Whittick about those amendments, and I do approve them and support them. There's an advisory council that was taken out of the bill, and that was an oversight on my part, as I mentioned, is one mistake. There's language that's reinstated regarding the prohibition on use of medical marijuana in public places. There's language that's reinserted allowing the police to exercise a search warrant, and that was, again, an oversight on my part. In the main, that's what the amendments do, Mr. Chairman. If you'd like a section or a amendment by amendment description, I'd be happy to provide that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Further questions from committee members? If not, Senator Wanzenreed may make closing statement.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to have this hearing, and I very much appreciate the fact that we have sponsors of, or excuse me, opponents of the bill that feel as strongly as they do. I'm not here on behalf of any particular industry. I'm here on behalf of the people that legally have been prescribed the use of medical cannabis. We can call it whatever you want to, but that's a scientific name, and this body has always made it a point to insert scientific language, and the reason that we had it in the statute was because it was enacted by the voters, Mr. Chairman. It's an interesting argument that on the one hand we say that everything is tamped down, everything is regulated, everything is fine, but for those of you that know people with medical marijuana cards, ask them how they actually access the people that actually grow. In many, many cases, they're forced to go on the black market. If that's the policy that we want to continue in Montana, that's fine. I believe that this bill provides a reasonable framework and a functional framework. If you don't like the fees and you think we ought to do it on the cheap, we'll get exactly what you don't want, which is to have this drug illicitly available in larger amounts. The mention of the fact that in Colorado we have all sorts of shops. Remember, Colorado is a full legalization along with the state of Washington, and this bill, while some of the opponents would argue that this is a full legalization under the guise of reform, it certainly is not. It is not. With regard to the issue about opening up, having medical marijuana shops everywhere, I'd like to bring your attention to page 41, line 11, which specifically provides authority governing the location of these facilities. And if it's not strong enough, you think it needs to be further clarified, let's talk about that. As I mentioned, I agreed to some of the amendments that were offered by Mr. Keim. That, again, was something on my part that I missed when I went through the bill, and I, like you, had too many other things to do, and I will take the full responsibility for that and any other deficiencies. The policy question before the legislature really is, are you satisfied with the system that's in place? If you are, then don't vote for this bill. But for those of you that receive emails, like I have, on behalf of those people that have cards, legally prescribed cards, and have conditions that need to be dealt with through the use of medical cannabis, through the legal prescription by a physician, ask yourself, have you contacted them to find out who they are? And you'll be very surprised. They don't meet the stereotypes that too many people in this building would bring to this discussion. They're older people, they're grandmothers, in many cases are parents of children, if you've taken the time to circle back. This is a serious issue. I don't take it lightly. I don't take the fact that I brought this bill and have incited this, but I want to just draw you back to the one thing. We should be able to discuss this bill, and I would ask you to take the time to look at the amendments. If you have concerns or other questions you'd like more information about, I'd be happy to provide it. I'd ask for a due pass recommendation, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And this will close the hearing on Senate Bill 377. Before we open the hearing on House Bill 505, we'll stand at recess for 5 minutes, allow people to leave that intend to leave, and the proponents of 505 can set up their displays in the next 5 minutes if they would.